1980, you'll recall, during the Reagan campaign for president, the Republican Party and one of the co-founders of the Heritage Foundation announced basically the war on voting, saying that we don't want everybody to vote. Our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down. The efforts have been directed largely towards minority groups. You saw William Rehnquist back in the 1960s in Arizona. In fact, it kind of pioneered this stuff with Operation Eagle Eye, where he would stand outside polling places that were largely Hispanic or Native American and try to intimidate them. This made him a big man in the Republican Party and ultimately got him onto the Supreme Court. So what is the state of Black America right now? How is this war against voting and broadly against minorities right across the board going in the United States? With us right now is Marc H. Morial. He is the president and CEO of the National Urban League, the former mayor of New Orleans from 1994 to 2002. And President Morial, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thank you for having me.
It's great to have you with us. So, I'm looking at your press release here, talking about gerrymandering and voter suppression, misinformation, voter intimidation. Let's just go down the list. First, broadly speaking, what is the state of Black America today, in your opinion?
Well, Black America's right to vote is under siege. There is a plot. And I think you know it, and you've reported on it, to destroy democracy. And for Black Americans, it means that, and this is an important data point, that since the January 6th insurrection, there have been 400 bills introduced across the United States to make it more difficult for people to vote, targeted at Black people. So voter suppression, gerrymandering, voter intimidation, misinformation are the tactics of this pernicious campaign, which really elevated after the election of Barack Obama, the Citizens United case, the challenge to the Voting Rights Act through a number of cases to restrict its application and its reach. So for Black Americans now, the most significant threat is the threat on the right to vote.
And that being the effort to reduce the power of Black. I mean, this last.
Well, so let me try to draw this picture. So
Sure.
Number one, in the 2020 election, 70% of the people who voted in a fashion other than going to a polling place and casting a vote in person. All right. In states like Georgia, where you had an extraordinarily high Black voter turnout, Black voters put 300,000 ballots into drop boxes in the Atlanta metro area. What is the Georgia legislature doing? We're going to cut out vote by mail. We're going to limit drop boxes instead of from several hundred down to only 20, and only allow drop boxes to be available during working hours. So there's an effort to strip away, make it hard for people to vote. In Georgia, there's a move to, the laws have been passed to require a very strict voter ID when large numbers of Georgians have no driver's license or state ID. Disproportionately, 56% of those who don't have a driver's license or state ID are African American. Right. These are surgically inserted efforts to try to make it more difficult. And it affects more than Black voters, but it's targeted at African-American voters. Then there's gerrymandering, drawing district lines. Several of these gerrymandered plans have been struck down by the courts. Others have been let go by the courts. But gerrymandered state legislative seats and congressional seats is another tactic of this plot to destroy democracy. Intimidation of voter officials. Clerks, Secretary of States, elections officials, 1 in 6 across the nation report being threatened, politically or physically. These are the tactics. This is the strategy of those who would narrow the electorate so that they can retain power. An oligarch can retain power.
Yeah, and these are the tactics that are used in Russia. These are the tactics that Viktor Orban used in Hungary to rise to power, particularly redrawing political districts and then packing the judiciary so that they always backed him up.
I am so glad, Tom, you said that, because we shared today when we released this report the connection to Putin and the connection to Putin's tactics and Putin's role in suppressing the votes through a cyber campaign in 2016. You are right. This anti-democratic wave goes beyond the shores of the United States.
And so what, it's like these guys have no shame. I mean, they come right out and all but admit that this is what they're up to. And, it doesn't seem to affect them whatsoever. I'm at a loss on occasion about how do we deal with this authoritarian white supremacist move to basically lock down power in the United States in a way that ultimately is going to lead us to a Putin-style government. Frankly, if Donald Trump had succeeded in his efforts to pull a Putin, he was trying to do the same thing Putin was. Oh yeah, I'm going to stay here. Even though the Constitution says, the Russian Constitution used to say that the president has to leave after 8 years. It doesn't say that anymore. And this is what Trump was trying to do as well. How do we wake America up to the danger of this?
And we have to
Mr.
wake
Morial.
America up. And Tom, a courageous Congress could have stopped this.
Yeah.
There were 2 bills that passed the House of Representatives. They died in the Senate because of the filibuster.
Yep.
The filibuster is the obstacle at the federal level to voting and democracy reform. And this has to be understood. So now we've got to slug it out in the courts. We've got to slug it out in the streets. We've got to try to overcome these restrictive laws. We have to fight in the thicket, so to speak. This is political guerrilla warfare against voter suppression, voter intimidation, gerrymandering, and the like. It's not going to be easy, but a courageous Congress. And Congress has exhibited courage on voting rights many times in the past. In this instance, you had all Democrats but 2, and then all Republicans opposed.
All right. This unified Republican opposition to the voting rights of minorities in the United States is extraordinarily troubling when you consider that, even back in 64, 65, the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act were broadly bipartisan. The Voting Rights Act, when George W. Bush was president, when it got reauthorized, I believe it was 98-0, wasn't it? Before the Supreme Court knocked it down in Shelby County.
I'm sorry, could you ask the question again?
Yes. The Voting Rights Act, I'm not, there wasn't so much of a question, just an observation that the Republicans have gone
you're right. The Supreme Court, this is what's important. The Roberts Court has been as hostile to voting rights of any court since courts before the 1950s.
Yeah.
We have been able to rely on the Supreme Court time and time again to protect voting rights. But the Roberts courts, in a number of decisions, one in 2006, one in 2013, and one or two last term, have basically sanctioned these challenges to the Voting Rights Act.
Right.
It is outrageous that the Supreme Court would strike down civil rights laws. This is what the Supreme Court did in the 1800s.
Yep.
In the 1883 case that struck down the 1875 Civil Rights Act. In the 1896 case called Plessy, that sanctioned segregation.
Yep.
The Supreme Court, whose most important responsibility is to uphold and protect the Constitution, is acting like a political body and doing the bidding of voter suppressors.
Yeah, we've got to take this challenge on. Marc H. Morial, the president and CEO of the National Urban League, NUL.org, by the way, is the website. MARCMORIAL is Marc's Twitter handle, and Nat Urban League also on Twitter.